Welcome to Go Further Faster Dynamic Pinning. This video covers what is perhaps one of the least talked about skills in all of Jiu-Jitsu, the skill of pinning. Now, when most people think about a pin in grappling sports, they think about holding someone's back down on the floor for a period of time. It's normally a skill associated with wrestling or judo. But pinning in Jiu-Jitsu is a very different animal. Pinning represents what is probably the single greatest point-scoring opportunities in all of Jiu-Jitsu. The highest scores in the sport come from pins. If we are to excel in pinning skills, the first step is to understand the nature of pinning in Jiu-Jitsu and see how it is very different from other grappling styles and what is required for excellence in this crucial skill. The foundational insight behind the pins of Jiu-Jitsu is to create asymmetries in attacking potential. A pin allows you to control and attack an opponent while he cannot attack you in return. There are two main elements behind the idea of pinning in Jiu-Jitsu. First, you must clear your opponent's legs. If you are on top of your opponent and he entangles you with his legs or can bring any part of his legs between your body and his, there is no pin. If you are behind your opponent, your legs must be hooked in above and inside his legs so that he cannot form any kind of effective entanglement upon you with his legs. Second, the value of the pin will be assessed by the potential for striking and submission in a combative situation while denying an opponent the ability to strike or submit you in return. These considerations allow us to distinguish the fundamental 5 pins of Jiu-Jitsu and the scoring hierarchy they represent. There are 5 pins in the sport. 2 of them are non-scoring. These are side pins and north-south pins. Then there are 3 scoring pins. Knee on belly scores 2 points, the mounted position scores 4 points, and the rear mount position also scores 4 points. Note immediately that the mount and rear mount at 4 points score substantially more than almost all other movements in the sport. You can clearly see that the notion of pinning in Jiu-Jitsu is very different from the other major grappling sports. Unlike wrestling, you must free yourself completely from your opponent's legs in order to be considered a pin. In the sports of judo or wrestling, a pin can end a match if held for a certain length of time. In Jiu-Jitsu, a pin never ends a match. In judo and wrestling, a pin is a pin. They all have the same value. In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the value is determined by asymmetry and striking and submission potential. Unlike wrestling and judo, Jiu-Jitsu allows chest-to-back pins. In judo and wrestling, pins require you to pin an opponent's back to the floor and maintain a chest-to-chest position. In Jiu-Jitsu, your own back can be on the floor and your chest locked to your opponent's back. So long as you have your legs hooked in and above your opponent's legs, you are considered to be pinning him. Understand then that the very nature of pinning in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu is substantially different from most of the other major grappling sports. The value of pinning in Jiu-Jitsu is enormous. Pinning offers probably the single greatest reward to effort ratio in the entire sport. It's a relatively low skill, low effort pathway to the biggest and easiest scores in Jiu-Jitsu. Pins enable you to exert tremendous tactical pressure on an opponent. Pressure is the basis of all submissions. The more pressure you can put an opponent under, the more likely it is that eventually he will break both physically and mentally and enable you to enter into your submission holds. So there is a tremendous link between your pinning skill and your submission success rate. Pinning enables you to access the whole body for submissions, arms, legs, and neck. If you can't get past your opponent's legs and into pins, you can only attack the lower body. Once you get past those legs and into your upper body pins, you can go down the body to the legs, attack the arms, and attack the neck. It is your ability to hold on to and go from one pin to another which enables you to access the best of all submissions, strangleholds. Jiu-Jitsu offers 2 main approaches to submission, joint locks and strangleholds. It is very clear that strangleholds are the more high percentage of the two. And only when you can go from one pin to another and transition around the body can you access the enormous potential of strangleholds. Pinning skill enables you to shut down your opponent's ability to attack you. It gives you the ability to attack without being attacked in return. And this is the basis of good jiu-jitsu. The main themes of this video. Let's start with the 3 golden rules of pinning. We're going to be looking at pinning in enormous detail, but you can summarize the main ideas behind pinning in jiu-jitsu in a very, very short and easy to remember fashion. The 3 golden rules of pinning are these: stay on top, stay behind, and stay away from your opponent's legs. Everything we do in this video is designed to get you working in those 3 fashions. If you're on top, you want to stay on top. If you're behind your opponent, you want to stay behind them. And as you do these 2 things, you want to continuously stay away from your opponent's legs. If we can do these 3 things, you're going to be a strong and powerful pinner. The 3 skills that you must master to become a great pinner. First, you have to be able to hold on to a given pin. Second, you must be able to move from one pin to another in order to take advantage of the enormous point scoring potential of dynamic pinning. And third, you must be able to extract a foot. Remember, your primary concern is to stay away from your opponent's legs. If he wraps up even a foot with his legs, the pin is broken. So those 3 skills again: we've got to be able to hold a pin, we've got to be able to move from one pin to another, and we have to be able to extract a foot. These 3 skills and developing mastery in them is the core subject matter of this video. The key to holding a pin is to use multiple variations of a single pin to thwart the various counter escapes that your opponents will attempt upon you. Understand that every pin has multiple variations. Each has its strengths and weaknesses. By going from variation to variation, you can exploit the strengths and avoid the weaknesses of those variations in the pins that we use. The key to moving from one pin to another is to maximize connection to your opponent while minimizing the momentum as you move from one position to another. We need to seek a successful compromise between tightness and flexibility. You want to be tight enough to your opponent to hold someone down with control, yet at the same time you want to be loose enough to move fluidly and freely around the body. The general rule which we employ throughout this video is that we want to be tight and rigid when we have broken our opponent's stance and posture by getting control of the elbow. And we want to be soft and fluid whenever our opponent has a strong defensive stance and we feel we don't yet have control of their head and elbow. The key to the 3rd skill of extracting a foot is to understand the notion of minimizing loss when pinning. Whenever a pin has been broken, we want to give up as little of the pin as possible. And using the same techniques that were shown in the half guard passing video, we will extract a trapped foot and recover a lost pin. These are the subjects of this video. If you follow the details, you will become a devastating pinner, and this will open a whole new world of scoring potential in the sport. Not only will you become a better scorer and run up scores that you never dreamed possible, but you'll also be a better submission artist. As you put your opponent under more and more tactical pressure from pins, so too your submission rates will increase. Now, let's start you off with a general theory of pinning. What is a pin? Okay. Whenever someone is down here and we want to immobilize them, let's understand what a pin is and what a pin isn't. Most of the time, people will tell you a pin is the use of body weight to control an opponent. But let's understand something right from the bat. Your body weight actually does very little to control your opponent. Giancarlo and I are roughly the same weight. Okay. If I go chest to chest on Giancarlo's body with nothing around him but my body weight, okay? The only thing touching the floor now is my toes. So you can see that the majority of my body weight is on him in a chest-to-chest position. Look how easily Giancarlo just puts me back in guard from here. It's so easy, it's a joke, okay? Now that's odd. I had close to 100% of my body weight on him, and it took him no more effort than moving a child to put me back in guard. Why? Why was such a high percentage of my body weight ineffective for the purpose of stopping and putting me back in guard? It's because I had no wedges set around my opponent's body. Now let's contrast this with a situation where I had my knee wedged into his hip here, and I have my elbow wedged into his hip here, and I have my bicep wedged into his head here, like so. Now, I'm going to take my chest off Giancarlo's chest, okay? You can't really see this because I'm wearing a gi, so I'll take my gi jacket off, and you'll see that my chest is not making contact with his chest. So, in other words, there is currently zero body weight on top of Giancarlo. My chest makes no contact with his. So I have an elbow and a knee wedged in here, my knee wedged in tight to his shoulder, my hand and bicep wedged to his head. But you can currently see my body is not touching him chest to chest. When he goes to put me back in guard, it's very difficult. Okay? Now, isn't that the oddest thing? When I had a very high percentage of my body weight on top of him, he easily put me back in guard when I had no wedges. But when I had 0% of my body weight on him, but with wedges set in place, it was very hard for him to put me back in guard. That should tell you everything you need to know about about pinning. Pinning is the science of placing wedges around your opponent's body at strategic points that prevent him from escaping. The only function of your body weight is to reinforce the wedges that you've set. But please understand that the majority of the work of your pins is done by wedges you put around your opponent's body, not by your body weight. Again, I put a big percentage of my body weight on him, and he moves so easily to put me back in guard. And when it stands in contrast to a situation where I have none of my body weight on him, and he goes to put me back in guard, just the presence of those wedges stops him in his tracks. Please understand this, that when it's time to go to pin people, where and how you place your wedges is far more important than what your body weight is. This is the basis of a theory of pinning. Now, I just gave you a spiel about how pinning was essentially the science of placing wedges around your opponent's body and reinforcing those with either a grip or your body weight, depending upon the pin. Let's talk more about wedging and start talking about the location of wedges, because ultimately your ability to precisely locate those wedges is what's going to enable you to pin someone successfully. So when someone lies down, let's understand the various targets of the wedges. Okay, the main points of focus will always be our opponent's head, our opponent's shoulders, our opponent's elbows, and our opponent's hips. Okay, we want to be able to block near side hips as much as possible to prevent our opponent bringing knees in and elbow escaping. I want to be able to block far side hip to prevent my opponent from shrimping and moving away from me. Okay, so understand that when his hips move away, he creates space to bring knees inside. So I want my knee wedged tight here to his hip, and my elbow wedged tight here to the other side of the hip. So when he goes to put us back in guard, it's quite difficult. Okay, so that would be one form of wedging. Another critical form of wedging is the idea of head control. When we go to control our training partner's head, the main choice we have is between cross-face variations, where my bicep goes into my opponent, and we lock in so that if he tries to turn into us, there's a wedge right there in his jawbone. Okay. The other is reverse cross faces, where I place the wedge here on the other side of his head. So when he tries to shrimp and move away from me, move his head away, he's well blocked. Okay. So when it's time to control the head, cross face variations and reverse cross face variations are the main methods. When it's trying to control our training partner's shoulders, the main method of operation is always underhooks and overhooks, like so. And these provide excellent control of our opponent's shoulders. Another excellent method of working is to control our training partner's elbows, okay? And the control of your opponent's elbows is strongly related to the shoulders, so much so that you can it's difficult to almost pull them apart. The methods of control are identical, overhooks and underhooks. Anytime I can take my opponent's elbow out and away from his body and up towards the shoulder line, that's money in the bank. When it's time to pin people, the hardest people to pin are people who do a good job of keeping their elbows close to their body. Okay, that enables them to bridge strongly, and it enables them to elbow escape strongly. What we're always looking to do is to get their elbows out and away up towards the shoulder line and even beyond. From here, it's very difficult for your opponent to bridge successfully and even harder for them to elbow escape successfully. Okay, so regardless of where we are, we're always looking to control our opponent's elbows. So one method of control of the elbows is to bring the elbows out and away from the body towards the shoulder line. If I cannot do this, a second method of control of the elbows is to bring the elbows in towards the center line, like so. So I either want elbows towards the center line to control people, or I want elbows out and away towards the shoulder line to control people. That's my basic choice with regards controlling my training partner's elbows. When we go to control our opponent, that placement of your wedges around your opponent's body will always focus on the hips, the head, the shoulders, and the elbows. Okay? Please understand this. Placing wedges in any other position is of limited value. When it's time to place those wedges, I will give you the insights required to know when to block one side of the hip versus another side, one elbow rather than another, when to bring an elbow towards the center line, when to bring it towards the shoulder. But your first step is to understand the basic idea of where do we place our wedges. And you're going to find it's always the same places: around the hips, around the head, underneath the shoulders or around the shoulders, and at the elbows. So when it's time to hold a strong man down, look how he work at the hips, or at the head, or at the shoulders, or at the elbows. Every wedge you use will be a variation of one of those various points of the human body: hips, head, elbows, and shoulders. Now, if wedging is the foundation of pinning, another classic foundation is that of base of support. If I have an opponent down in a position where I can go in to pin him, a natural question for you to be asking is, where should my base of support be? And understand there are variations in this. Okay, as a general rule, the wider my base of support, the less effective my wedging will be. And the tighter my wedges are, the narrower my base of support will be. And so ultimately it's up to you to find a satisfactory compromise between the width of your base and the tightness of your wedges. So for example, if I'm mounted on my training partner and I take my knees and wedge them very tightly to his body, so there's no space whatsoever between us, that means that if my opponent should go into a quick and sudden bridge, I have very narrow base of support and I fall very, very easily. On the other hand, if I widen my base so that the wedges are much further from my opponent's body, when he goes to bridge me, it's a lot more difficult, but now it's very easy for him to elbow escape inside and start to escape by a different route. Okay. Similarly with the upper body grips, when I'm across my training partner's side, I could, for example, have a wide base with my hands by taking a cross face with one and a hand out wide on the mat with the other. But this would make it relatively easy for my opponent to pommel into an underhook and then start to turn up into me and causing problems. This stands in contrast with a very tight top, head, and arm grip with my training partner, where I take the wedges and lock them in tight to his body and start driving into the man. That means that when he goes to pommel in for that underhook, it's almost impossible. But it makes it quite easy for my opponent to turn and push and come up into a propping escape, which takes me over very, very easily. So you can see what's happening here. The tighter I set my wedges, the narrower my base becomes. And the more expansive my wedges become, the wider my base of support, but the easier for my opponent to get inside my wedges and put me back in guard. Learning to find a satisfactory compromise between tight, compressed wedges versus base of support is a big part of your success with pinning. You have to be able to flow from one to the other. When it's time to be wide, get those arms out wide. When it's time to narrow and create very strong wedging around your opponent, then do so. But what you can't do is just have a one-size-fits-all approach where you just go wide and stay wide or narrow and stay narrow. That's when it's easy for your opponent to find a way around your pins. Now, let's go into what is probably the single biggest theme of this entire video, the one that I want you paying most attention to. It could be said in a single sentence, this critical idea that's so important for your progress. There is no such thing as a perfect pin, but there is perfect pinning. Now that sounds like a paradox. What the hell does that mean? Every pin has its strengths and weaknesses. Okay, let's look, for example, at the most popular form of side control pin, where I'm square to my opponent with the so-called top head and arm grip. I have the head and one arm locked up like so. Okay, I'm just going to demonstrate this from the other direction. This has one great virtue associated with it, and that is stability. If my opponent goes to bridge, I feel very stable because my chest is square to the floor. However, it has an obvious weakness. There is a gap between my hip, which can be exploited by my opponent's knee. So that if my opponent brings his knee inside my hip, he can easily put me back in guard, and we've lost the pin. Okay? So that's the weakness of this method of pinning. It presents an open space for my opponent to get inside position and defeat my pin. Let's come further this way. Now, I can cover that. If that's the weakness of the pin, I can cover that by switching to another pin. In this case, a forward sit-out. Okay? So Placido exploits the weakness of my pin. So I turn my hips away from my opponent and I sit out. Now, when he tries to bring the knee in, no way. My hip is on the floor. There's no way to get inside position. My hips are inside my training partner's hips. The new weakness of this new pin, the forward sit-out, it has tremendous strength in this direction because my feet are pointing that direction. Placido tries to pull me in that direction, I won't move. But it has no base backwards over my shoulder. So if Placido sits up, I can be taken backwards. So that's its weakness. So when I see Placido trying to exploit that weakness, my foot comes through, I lift the head, and we return back to the initial pin. Okay. Now the weakness of this pin, as we saw earlier, is that my opponent can gain inside position. But what if I took my second arm over the top, locked up his elbow, and then put my hand here inside his hip? Then I could hit a sit-out in the opposite direction, a reverse sit-out. Now when he tries to bring his knee in, my knee blocks his hip. Now, we already saw that these pins are very strong in the direction that the feet are pointing. If Placido tried to push me down his body, it's impossible. But if Placido bridged, he might take me in that direction of weakness. So if I feel my opponent bridging, it's up to me to return back to a square position. Then I use my arm to block the hip. So my elbow is inside his hip. When he tries to put me back in guard, very, very difficult. Okay, so you can see I've used 3 pins to dominate one pinning situation, the side pinning situation. We had one pinning situation, side pin, and 3 forms of pin: a forward sit out, a rear sit out, and a square kneeling position. So I went through 3 different pins to maintain one overall pinning position, the side position in general. Okay, I used the strengths of those 3 pins to cover up the weaknesses of the other pins. So as the square pin was weak in one direction, I used a forward sit out to cover that weakness. But then when my opponent tried to exploit the weakness of the forward sit out, I had to go back to the original pin and vice versa. Used in this way, you can see the key to pinning people is movement, and in particular, movement towards the strengths of certain pins and away from the weaknesses of those pins. Used in combination in this fashion, you can hold strong, resisting opponents down. Don't think you can ever hold someone down with a single pin. Every pin has its weaknesses. And if your opponent's smart, knows what he's doing, he will eventually find those weaknesses and exploit them. So it's up to us to be able to switch from one pin to another. Each one of those variations of the various pins has its good points and its bad points. We have to look to exploit the good points and use movement to avoid the bad points. If we can work like that, you can be very successful pinning people. Now, when it's time to actually pin a resisting opponent, there's a prime element involved in this whole idea of dynamic pinning. And this is the compromise between tightness and looseness. I want to be tight enough to immobilize people, but I want to be loose enough to be able to move around them. And finding that compromise between tightness on the one hand and looseness on the other is essentially the story of your mastery of pinning. I can't just be completely loosey-goosey with my training partner. Okay, he's down. I can't just hold on to him in a weak, indecisive fashion. He's going to pommel in and easily escape. But on the other hand, I can't be locked on with a death grip to my opponent because then I can't move. Okay, if I just lock on with everything I've got, I don't care how tightly you squeeze someone. Eventually, he's just going to work his knees in, and his legs are stronger than your grip, and you get put back in guard. So you can see there's two ways for you to fail with dynamic pinning. You can be too loose and you're just not effective holding someone, or you can be so tight that you actually immobilize yourself and, as well as the other guy. Remember, the idea is to immobilize him, not to immobilize yourself. You want to move around his body. The understanding is you're never really going to be able to fully immobilize a strongly resisting opponent who knows what he's doing. It's just unrealistic, especially if he's bigger and stronger than you. So we want to use movement to pin people. And that requires a certain amount of looseness and flexibility on your part, but not so much looseness and flexibility that you're just not effective. The guy just pushes you off and says to hell with you and walks out of your pins. So it's up to you to find this compromise between enough looseness to move around your opponent's body in a fluid, efficient fashion, but enough tightness to actually hold someone. Now, a natural question for you guys to ask is, okay, what is the ideal compromise? How should I be loose? Or when should I be loose and when should I be tight? Well, obviously, I can never just give you a complete guide to this. There has to be some degree of experience on your part where you learn over time what is the ideal compromise between tightness and looseness. But I can give you some good general advice that will help you a lot. Okay, this is the idea that I like to convey to my students. If I have broken my opponent's posture, okay, I've beaten him on posture, then I like to be tight. If I have not broken my opponent's posture and I feel he's in a strong defensive posture, then I like to be loose. Because if he's in a strong posture, he's going to be able to hit various forms of escape. And I better be loose so that I can move with his movements and stay pinning him. If, on the other hand, I'm confident that I've broken his posture and I have a postural advantage over my opponent, then I can get in tight and exploit what I've done. Now, the next question, the obvious question here is, okay, what does it mean to broken someone posture? Well, what does that even mean? Okay, it means two things: cross-face control and elbow control. The number one thing is elbow control. Your opponent's ability to defend this position is largely bound up with his ability to get his elbows in inside position. And if he can get his elbows in those inside positions, it's going to be pretty easy for him to escape. Okay, so if I feel his elbows are in good position here, it's up to me to be relatively loose with my training partner. So as he comes up to his knees, for example, I can easily extend across to the other side and exploit the various positions that we find ourselves in. Okay, I was loose enough to move, and I was aware of the need for looseness because at no point did I feel I was in control of his posture. So I kept a nice loose body which can move quickly enough to adapt to the changing circumstances in which I find myself. But what if I have gained postural advantage? And we're defining that in terms of elbow control. The further I get my opponent's elbows away from his body and up to his shoulder line, the more you have broken his posture. This is where he's at his best, here. That's when he can get inside my crossface, underneath my far arm, and that's when he can start beating me. So the more my opponent's elbows are close to his body, the more concerned I am. Even worse, the more my opponent's elbows go towards the floor, the more worried I am. Doesn't matter which side, okay? Say, for example, Placido posts on my tricep and then brings this elbow to the mat. Now he can start to off-balance me very easily. But if I have Placido's elbow connected up here so it can't make it to the floor, even when he goes to post on my tricep now, he can't do anything meaningful with it because he can't bring his elbow to the mat. But when the elbow goes to the floor, oh no, I get taken over very, very easily. Same thing with the elbow here. The more the elbow comes down to the floor, the easier it is for Placido to get inside position and start turning up to his knees. And now you're in trouble. So what I'm always looking for is to get Placido's elbows away from the body and up. If I cannot bring the elbow away from the body, then at the very least, I should be able to bring the elbow up to the center line. The worst case for me is someone where the elbows are close to the body and down to the mat. On either side, it's bad news. Okay? A much better scenario is his elbow wedged up on his center line. And the best case scenario of them all is the elbow wedged up here by the shoulder line and away from the body. If I feel I've done those things, then I'm not afraid to put some heat on my opponent and put some tension in my body. Okay? So if I lock up and I control my training partner's elbow, I'll play a tight game here. Okay? When he goes to shift me around, it's hard for him to be effective because I've beaten him on elbow position. You can see that his elbow is in the outside position. Here, he tries to get an elbow to the floor. It's not happening. When he goes to put me back in guard, I can put some horsepower into my pins now. When I come forward into the mounted position, I'm walking his elbow up above the shoulder line. I'm not afraid to put some horsepower into my pin now. When he goes to bridge and move around, it's tough from here. Okay, so I'm not afraid to put some heat on my pins because I've taken his elbow out of position. But if his elbow's coming tight, this is not the time for me to be squeezing it. Plus, I can just elbow escape, and it's so easy for him to put me back in guard. So I put tightness in my pins when I've beaten them on posture. And that means I've got good control of the head and good control of the elbows, which means the elbows are either up and away or in tight to the center line. Then I'm not afraid to put some heat on my pins and lock it up tight. Plus, it goes to put me back in guard. It's not easy. But if Placido gets good posture on me and starts to get those elbows in winning position, then it's up to me to be loose and play a movement-based game in order to be effective. Okay? So I can't give you a complete answer as to when should you be tight and when should you be loose. But I can give you that general word of advice. When you beat his posture and get his elbows away and up to the center line, or across to the center line and away from the floor, then you can tighten things up. Play a tight, controlling game. When you feel he's got the beat on you with elbows where they should be, close to the floor and close to his torso, then it's better to play a loose game because he's probably going to be moving defensively successfully very soon. So you have to be able to move around his body and follow where he goes. That's my general rule of thumb for when you should be tight and when you should be loose. Now, let's talk about the 3 golden rules of dynamic pinning. I'm going to give you a vast amount of information in this video. And there's probably times you're thinking, how the hell am I ever going to remember that when I got some 250-pound monster sitting on my chest, or I'm trying to control a 250-pound monster from top position? How am I going to remember all these details you're giving me? Well, all the details of this video, no matter how many there are, no matter how complicated they can seem, all come down to 3 little things. The 3 golden rules of pinning are very simple to understand, and they give direction to all the details that I offer you in this video. Stay on top, stay behind your opponent, and stay away from your opponent's legs. You can do those 3 things, you're going to be a good dynamic pinner. Whenever we've got someone here, I can never accept being taken from top position to bottom position. Okay, so if I'm side control and my opponent posts on my elbow and rolls on through, that's just a disaster. Okay, we're completely from a great controlling position to being pinned. I'm mounted on someone. He traps an arm, takes me over. That's a disaster. Okay, I went from top position to bottom position. So our first responsibility is always to stay on top of our opponent. I don't care what's going on. That's always priority number one. Okay. With regards to the second one, stay behind your opponent. If I'm behind someone, like so, I always want to stay behind my opponent's elbows, like so. His whole thing here is always going to be to turn and face us and get his elbows between he and I. That's always his route to escape. So I always want to make sure that I stay behind an opponent under these circumstances. Okay? Once I've gotten behind someone, whether it's just with upper body control or if it's with a combination of upper body and lower body, our whole thing is to stay here. Okay? And the third great criteria, I have to stay away from my opponent's legs. So if I'm pinning someone and I get sloppy with leg position and he captures my foot, once the foot is captured, the pin is broken. There is no more pin. Now I have to free my leg in order to recover my pin. Okay? So those are your three responsibilities. Stay on top, stay behind your opponent if you are behind him, and stay away from the legs. If I'm behind my opponent, here, if he captures a leg, it means nothing. Okay? So chest to back pins are a little different. Him capturing a foot here has no meaning, no value. Okay? But if he should start to escape and turn and face me, like, if he captures a foot now, because we're facing each other, that has value, and the pin is now broken. It's over. There is no pin now. He's captured my foot because he is facing me with his chest, and he has captured my foot. If we are chest to back, and he captures my foot, this has no value. This does not break the pin. But if he first comes out, turns to face me, and captures a foot, the pin is broken now. Okay? So whenever we go to move with our opponent, these simple rules, these three golden rules, are your basic guide to action. Stay on top, stay behind your opponent, and stay away from his legs. So let's put this in a quick little motion now. We're pinning someone. When I see someone trying to bring me over, by bridging, keep our body locked in place. When I come across into the mounted position, I hook in on my training partner's foot. So when he goes to explosively bridge us over, from here, we're able to keep that top position. He goes to turn his body, and from here we stay behind our man. Find our hooks in place, focus on his staying behind. If we feel he's starting to turn and face us, then from here, we want to come back up into top position. The main thing is we stay away from his legs. He goes to capture my foot. If he gets my foot, my whole thing here is to slide that foot out and stay away from his legs. I can move around his body as much as I want. I can go up, knee on belly. It's all good as long as I stay away from his legs. Okay? I can move back into a mounted position and constantly focus on staying away from my training partner's legs. If he captures a foot, our whole thing under these circumstances is always to free the foot and go back into the various pins that we favor. If he goes to bridge me over, the onus is on me to get the inside position with my foot as he tries to come up. Because I have inside position, I can always return him back to your mat. And come over, he bridges. And from here, I use inside foot position to ensure that we stay on top. Never surrendering that top position. Moving around that training partner. Driving in. Staying behind the man. He goes to turn them towards us. We feel there's a danger now of him capturing our foot. It's important from here that we be able to recover. Free the foot and go back in. He goes to explosively bridge. The onus is on us to always stay away from our training partner's legs. And so in this way, you can see I move around my training partner's body, obeying always that simple threefold structure. Stay on top, stay behind your opponent when you're behind, and stay away from his legs. That's your primary focus in all of dynamic pinning. Okay, one of the great goals of this video is to turn you into a master of pins in the sport of jiu-jitsu. It's very important to understand that your first step in mastery of the pins of jiu-jitsu is to understand what are the scoring criteria, because they're very different from other combat sports. If you don't know what the criteria are, it's very hard for you to actually use the pins for what they're for, to maximize your point scoring potential that puts your opponent under tactical pressure that opens up submission holds. There are three main elements in jiu-jitsu with regards to scoring criteria. The first is the precise positioning which the rules demand in order to score points. The second is the idea of 3 seconds of control, that is, of time. Jiu-jitsu only rewards you if you can demonstrate control. So you can't just get the position itself. You have to get the position and control it for a period of time. That is a measured count of 3 seconds at a minimum. And the third element is the idea of a broken pin. Remember, in jiu-jitsu, you don't have a pin unless you stay away from your opponent's legs. If your opponent should catch any part of your legs while you're trying to pin him, the pin is officially broken and you have to start again. Okay? So those are the three key elements. Let's have a look at them now. Remember that there are only 3 scoring pins in jiu-jitsu: knee on belly, mount, and rear mount. None of the other pins score. So if I have a side pin on my opponent, it doesn't matter what I do in terms of movement around. This doesn't score anything. Okay, same with north-south. The only scoring pins in jiu-jitsu are variations of knee on belly, mounted position, and rear mounted position. Those are the 3 scoring pins. So it's important that those 3 scoring pins, we understand what's required for a score. If you lie down, Placido, facing the other way. In the case of knee on belly, the scoring criteria is simple. The point of my knee has to touch anywhere from near hip to far hip, and anywhere in between, and my other knee has to be off the floor. Okay, very simple. So with regards upper body, there is no criteria. It's only a lower body criteria. My hands can be in different places. Belt, floor, means nothing. What is the scoring criteria is the position of this knee, which has to be anywhere from the hip on the near side to the hip on the far side, or anywhere in between. And my second knee has to be off the floor. If my second knee is on the mat, that is not knee on belly, and it's not a scoring position. Okay, so we have to take the second knee up off the floor, and now we have a scoring position regardless of what we're doing with our hands. The scoring criteria is lower body. 1 knee off the mat, 1 knee between your opponent's hips. Okay. If you reverse it and put the opposite knee, this is not a score. Okay. So that's the scoring criteria for knee on belly. With regards to the mounted position, the scoring criteria are either 2 knees on the floor, like so. There are no upper body scoring criteria here. I can have my hands in various different kinds of positions, and it'll score the same. What counts here is lower body criteria. I have to have at least 1 knee on the floor, and there has to be contact of my hips to my opponent's hips, and I have to be facing chest to chest towards my opponent. Okay, so here I have 2 knees on the floor, but I'm facing the wrong way. There's no score for this position. So I have to face my opponent chest to chest with at least 1 knee on the mat. So this too would be a scoring position. because I have a knee on the floor and one knee off, but at least one knee is down on the mat and my hips are connected to my opponent's hips like so. Okay. Now, things get more complicated when your opponent starts slipping an arm through like so. This is still a score because my opponent has only one arm underneath my leg like so, but the other arm is not. But if my opponent took both of his arms and dug it, this is not the mounted position, and this will not score. Okay, you have failed to satisfy the basic scoring criteria that your two knees, at least one of them, should be underneath your opponent's arms. So this is acceptable because at least you have one knee underneath his arm. But this is unacceptable because both of his elbows are now underneath your legs. This is not a controlling position. You would have to move away from here and adjust your position. So basic scoring criteria for the mount is, again, a lower body criteria. Okay, the hands can be in any one of different positions. It's irrelevant. Doesn't count towards the score. It's all about my lower body, and it's about my two knees or one knee being on the floor, and my hips have to be in contact with my opponent. Okay, so here I have a knee on each side of my opponent's body, but I do not have contact with my opponent, so this would not be a mounted position. This would not be a mounted position because I don't have feet on the mat on both sides of the body. Okay, it's a good position, but it's not a scoring position. Okay, it wouldn't be until my foot slaps out. Now you've got 2 feet on the mat, 2 knees on the mat on each side of the body, and you're good. If you just slip an arm underneath my leg, you're still good. This is still a good mounted position. If he slips the other arm under, now you're no longer underneath your opponent's 2 arms, and you're not satisfying scoring criteria anymore. Okay. Now, with regards to the rear mounted position, again, the criteria is lower body. You can have your arms in any one of different positions. That's irrelevant. What is relevant is your foot position. From here, my 2 feet must be roughly symmetrical and inside my opponent's hips. So my legs are on top of his legs and hooked from the inside in a roughly symmetrical position. Small variations are allowable so long as your feet stay inside. That's fine. Okay. But what you can't have is situations where 2 feet, one of them is outside of your opponent's hips. This is not a scoring position. This is not a scoring position. You have to be able to hold here for at least 3 seconds of control, and then you can make adjustments to other positions as you see fit. You've already scored. Okay? But there must be 3 seconds of control with your 2 feet symmetrically or roughly symmetrically inside your opponent's legs. Any other foot position does not score. Only when this is held for 3 seconds do we get a score. And again, upper body grip is irrelevant. Okay? If your opponent should scoop under a leg on one side and you have the feet in, that's fine. One leg is acceptable. But if your opponent should put 2 underneath, this is unacceptable. And this will not be a scoring position. As long as you stay here, 2 feet symmetrical, and only one arm underneath one leg, this too allows you to score. Okay? Provided the feet are in the inside position. So those are the scoring criteria. You can see that your upper body positioning is irrelevant to the scoring criteria. It's your lower body in all 3 pins that actually score: knee on belly, mount, and rear mount. You can see that there's some small intricacies of body positioning, and if they're not satisfied, you will not score. So your first requirement is to understand the small, precise elements of what actually constitutes a score, as we've outlined them in that example. Now, the next big thing you have to understand is time. Okay, here's a little quiz for you. I've got an opponent down in front of me, and from here I hit a nice little guard pass. Okay, I cut through, I go into my opponent, I come up knee on belly, I go through, knee on belly on the other side, I come down into the mounted position, he turns, I take his back, taking his back, hooks go in. From here he turns and faces me again. And from here I come forward back into the mounted position. I come across, knee on belly again. Then he takes my foot, traps it, and puts me back in guard. Okay? A question for you. How many points did I just score? There was a lot of action, right? The mounted position on one occasion, rear mounted position at one point, a couple of knee on bellies in there. There was a guard pass. How many points did I score? The answer is 0. because none of those positions were held for 3 seconds of control. I went through a blizzard of movements. I passed his guard, I got mounted, I got multiple knee-on bellies, I got the rear mount, and I didn't score a dime because none of those positions were held for 3 seconds of control. Understand something. Jiu-jitsu rewards control. Movement is rewarded provided it's done with some form of bodily control, and the measure of control is time. To be precise, 3 seconds at a minimum. Okay? So when we go into a position of advantage, it's important from here we get used to the idea of slowing things down and measuring control. As he goes to put me back in guard, I got to fight for 1, 2, 3. Okay, the referee points out the points, and we've got the points. When we come across into the mounted position, when we drive across our training partner, we have to hold 3 seconds of control. 1, 2, 3. We come up, knee on belly. 1, 2, 3. Back to the mounted position and holding in for time. Okay? If we don't satisfy the time requirement of 3 seconds, you don't satisfy the scoring criteria. It's as simple as that. So my recommendation for you is that when you go into these positions, slow it down. Don't be in a rush. You don't get rewarded for movement around your opponent's body. You get rewarded for movement around your opponent that exhibits control. And the measure of control is time. At a minimum, 3 seconds. So take it down a level. Get to your position and hold it. Learn to have a little patience. Hold it for 3 seconds. Look for the referee if it's a competitive situation. Score your points and then move on. Okay? Don't be in such a rush. Jiu-jitsu doesn't reward rushes. It rewards control. Now, we've seen the idea that precise body positioning is the first prerequisite scoring criteria, and that control over time, in particular 3 seconds, is the second criteria. The third criteria is the notion of a broken pin. Okay, what is a broken pin? Well, we know now that the basis of pinning in jiu-jitsu is that you pass your opponent's legs. If Placido has any form of control over my legs, you don't have a pin. There's no pin here. Okay, he's on his back, you're chest to chest, but you're not pinning him. It's not until we get completely free of our opponent's legs and we have upper body chest to chest or lower body chest to chest with hooks in. Only then are we pinning people, and we've got to hold it for 3 seconds. Okay. We've seen that once we get to the pins, there are non-scoring pins like the one I have now, side control, and there are scoring pins like knee on belly, mount, rear mount, etc. Whenever we get into situations like this, the main danger we face is that my opponent will capture my leg. Okay. The pin is now broken. The second Placido gets a hold of my foot, even just a single foot, the pin is gone, it's broken. Okay? And now the onus is on me to clear the foot and recover the pin. The onus is on him to capture my foot and now break the pin. And so we get this fascinating interplay between my ability to recover a pin and Placido's ability to break a pin. And there's this constant battle between the two of us. I'm always looking in these circumstances to recover a pin, and he's always looking to break a pin. The most realistic way for him to break a pin is always to capture a foot, a knee, and ultimately the leg itself. There are other ways for him to break a pin, for example, a powerful bridge. But at the highest levels, this is less likely to occur. By far and away, the most common method of breaking a pin, by a very large majority, is that of capturing a foot. Okay. This also plays very interestingly into the scoring criteria of jiu-jitsu. If you ever have a given pin, you cannot simply go from one pin to the same pin and keep scoring points. The rules of jiu-jitsu do not allow this. So, for example, Placido is down, and I have knee on belly. Here, if I hold for 3 seconds, I score. But I cannot just go back down, pop up, hold for 3 seconds, and score again. It doesn't work that way. I cannot just score and score and score and score with the same pin. Okay, otherwise jiu-jitsu would be a kind of a ridiculous sport where people would just get knee on belly and just keep getting it until they racked up a football score. Okay, the rules here are very simple. If I take a pin, for example, knee on belly, and I get my score, the only thing that breaks the pin is his defensive movement. So Placido hits an escape and puts my foot back in. I've lost the pin. He's got my foot. Get the foot. Okay, so the pin is now broken. He's got my foot. But if I were able, under these circumstances, to free my leg and go knee on belly on the other side, that counts for more scores because he defensively put me back in guard. And then I passed his guard and got the same pin again, so I score again. But I cannot just artificially put myself down and put myself up. Hold for 3 seconds, go back down, hold for 3 seconds, and score. The game doesn't work that way. He has to put me back through some kind of defensive movement into his guard. I have to repass, and then I can score a second knee on belly, a second mount, etc. Okay? You can't just repeat the same move you've been doing and run up a very high score. You have to wait for him to put you back in guard, repass a second time, and then you can repeat the process and run up your scores like that. So those are the 3 main criteria that we have to pay attention to when it's time to build up our scores with dynamic pinning. First, you've got to know the actual criteria per pin. We explain them pretty clearly to you in this segment. You have to be quite precise with your body position. You have to understand what criteria you have to satisfy if you're going to score the points. It's a little more precise than many people understand. Second thing, you've got to acknowledge the value of time. You have to hold and control and demonstrate control for a minimum of 3 seconds to score. Don't just rush around from pin to pin before the time has expired. And thirdly, you've got to understand the idea of a broken pin. You can't just repeatedly score with the same pin and artificially run up scores. Your opponent has to break a pin with an escape, and then you have to go through the process of passing, getting back into a pin, and scoring a second time. In this way, understanding the notion of a broken pin, understanding the effective time, and understanding the precise criteria per position, you'll be able to score very effectively with your various dynamic pins. Now, let's start to understand the importance of the theory of wedges for your development as someone who's going to pin someone in a competitive situation. Okay, we now are understanding pins as a placement of various wedges around your opponent's body, wedges that are reinforced by grip or body weight. Once you get this key insight, you start to understand what the battle is between he and I. It's my desire to put the wedges as tight around my opponent's body as possible. The only way my opponent can escape is to get inside my wedges. So for example, if I have a crossface on my opponent, my shoulder is inside Giancarlo's shoulder. My left shoulder is inside his right shoulder. And as a result, my left shoulder gets inside his jawline. So I'd have 2 kinds of inside control here. But what if Giancarlo took his right hand and put it inside my bicep? Okay, and then put his palm on my bicep like so. Then he would have the inside position. His hand is inside my bicep. And you can see what's happened. I've completely lost control of his head as a result. Okay. If I have my arm inside and underneath his, then I get to control his shoulder. But if Giancarlo pommels his hand around and takes the inside position on my arm, I no longer have any control of his far shoulder. Okay. So you can see what's happening here. I started off with inside control with my left side and inside control with my right side. But as Giancarlo steals the inside position here and here, now I have no ability to put wedges around my opponent, so he moves easily underneath me and starts going into his escapes. Okay, so too with the lower body. Here, my knee is inside my opponent's hip. My hip is inside his knee. So I have a good wedge here like so. If my elbow wedges the other side, when he goes to move his hips around, it's quite difficult. But if Giancarlo had a strong bridge in this direction here, he moves my wedge on the far hip. Go back. Here, my wedge is set on the floor. But when he bridges, the wedge comes off the floor. So when he moves, I lose that wedge on that side. Now look as Giancarlo's right knee comes between us. He steals the inside position. So when I try to re-wedge, it has no effect. And from here, he easily puts us back in guard and escapes. Okay, so you can see what's happening here. The pinner is always trying to set strong wedges around the hips, elbows, shoulders, and head. And the person being pinned is always looking to get inside those wedges so that they can start to move inside the wedges that have been set to control them. And as he gains inside position, he gains a greater and greater ability to move inside my wedges and ultimately to escape. So there's a real battle here between my ability to set controlling wedges and his ability to get inside them. This is essentially the battle for inside position. Okay, I want inside position. I want my knee inside his hip. I want my arm inside his shoulder, my arm inside his shoulder, my head inside his shoulder like so. And so this would be a good example of me dominating inside position. He, on the other hand, wants his elbow inside my hip, his hand inside my bicep, and then ultimately his knee inside my hip. And then he dominates the battle for inside position. He escapes. So really, the battle lines can be drawn very, very clearly for both him and for me. I want to set my wedges as tightly as possible around his hips, elbows, shoulder, and head, and he wants to constantly frustrate me by getting his elbows, hands, head, etc. inside my wedges. And that's the whole battle of pinning. Once you see that, everything else becomes self-explanatory. Let's understand that one of the biggest weapons in this battle are these, your opponent's elbows. Okay, if he can get his elbows close to his body, it's very, very hard for me to win the battle for inside position. Probably the second biggest element in the battle are these, your opponent's knees. If he can get knees and elbows together, I will never get inside position on my opponent. I'll always be an easy person to escape from. So always what we're looking to do is to get his elbows out and away from his body, and the space between his elbows and his knees as far apart as possible. That's always the goal of the person pinning. The person being pinned always has the goal of bringing those two together and starting to move into his escapes. That's the basic battle for inside position. So always our gambit as the person pinning is to get those damn elbows out from inside position. Okay, so some common sense tricks for this. As my opponent goes to push me with those annoying elbows, we're always looking to hold an elbow, lift it, and put his elbow outside of our hip. Okay, this outside elbow position is a winning position for me and a losing position for Giancarlo. If I can get the elbow outside of the hip, that is a big, big deal. When he goes to elbow escape now, it's almost impossible. He will not be able to elbow escape until he recovers elbow position and then gets back to work. Okay, so always what I'm looking to do is to turn his elbow and put his elbow outside of my hip as much as possible. I can do this like so. I can also do it, elbows in, by walking down his body and coming backwards. We'll be looking at a bunch of ways, but they all result in the same finishing position. His elbow outside my hip. Okay. If I'm in the mounted position and his elbows are in, it might require me to first walk the arms up high, like so, and get his elbows away from his body using my arms. Okay. Then I can always walk my legs up later. And what have we got now? His elbows outside of my hip. Anytime his elbows are inside my knees and thighs, that's a winning position for him and a losing position for me. So we always want to create situations where we're walking elbows north and creating situations where he cannot get his elbows inside my hips. As long as his elbows are in the outside position, you're winning the pinning game. Okay, but the moment his elbows come into inside position, it's only a matter of time until our opponent starts an escape and starts to break the lock of our pins. Okay, so always our goal is to get his elbows outside our hips, regardless of the pin we're in. Okay, if we can't get elbows outside of our hips, at the very least, we should be looking to get elbows away from the center line. If you are in a kind of pin that doesn't permit this, so for example, north-south, here, it's not really realistic to try and pull elbows away from the center line because of your body position. Your hips are above the shoulder line. In these situations, your goal is different. It's to get his elbows to the center line here. Okay? And now when he goes to move around, it's a difficult thing. You've got excellent control. When he goes to elbow escape from here, very, very difficult. When he goes to knee escape from here, very, very difficult. Okay? So when we're working above the shoulder line, for example, in a north-south pin, the goal is again the elbows, but instead of elbows away from the center line, it's elbows towards the center line. By going underneath and locking up on our training partner, when he goes to move around from here, it feels like a very, very controlling pin. And you can easily hold someone down in these positions for long periods of time. Okay? So that's the battle for inside control. One of the key elements in your development is a strong pinner. Now, let's go into a theoretical spiel about the notion of pinning in the sport of jiu-jitsu, the mechanical elements behind it. The theory involved here is very important for your practice later on. Ultimately, I want you to be strong in theory so you can get better at practice. Now, if we've got an opponent down and we're interested in pinning them, we know the basic ideas tactically behind pinning jiu-jitsu. You got to get away from your opponent's legs. There's no pin until you've passed your opponent's legs. And from here, we have to hold them down and demonstrate control for a certain period of time, usually around 3 seconds. Then we have to be able to move around our opponent's body from pin to pin to actually get into the scoring pins of jiu-jitsu, as opposed to the non-scoring pins. Your best ally in working in this fashion is to have a strong theoretical understanding of how you mechanically pin someone in the sport. One of the great themes of this video is that the basis of pinning is the theory of wedges. Okay? A wedge is a mechanical apparatus designed to either immobilize or to split something. So, for example, a knife is a form of a wedge where you cut through a material and the very thin wedge of a knife separates the material that you're cutting through. The other great purpose of wedges is to immobilize. So, for example, a doorstop is a classic example of this. You have a door swinging in the breeze. You take a simple door stopper, you put it underneath the door, and lo and behold, the door is immobilized. Your body can be made into a set of wedges around your opponent's body. And just as a simple doorstop can hold a door in place, your body, in particular your arms and your legs, can be used to set up wedges around your opponent's body and stop him from moving the same way you can stop a door from moving. Now, in order to do this efficiently, you have to be able to set those wedges efficiently. And the best place to set your wedges around your opponent's body are the hips, the head, and the elbows. Okay? I'm going to say that again because it's very important. The holy trinity of pinning your opponent's body with wedges are hips, head, and elbows. Those are the three things that we're looking to set wedges around more than anything else. And if we can do a good job of that, you can take very big, very strong people and hold them down reliably. Now, what does it mean to put in a wedge on someone? What does that even mean? Well, we can use our elbows and our knees to wedge our opponent's body very, very successfully. So you'll see that when we're here with our training partner, I can take my knee and put it as a wedge here inside my training partner's hip. Then I can take my elbow on the other side and wedge the other hip. Now, I have no body weight on Placido at all. All I have is my knee and my elbow wedged around his hips. When Placido goes to shrimp and move around, the hips won't move. His head can move because there's nothing wedging that. He can move his head around, but the hips aren't going anywhere. If I added to this the idea of a crossface on my training partner and locked in on my training partner like so that my hand underneath his shoulder was a wedge on one side of his body, and my elbow and my shoulder is a wedge around his head and shoulders on the near side. Now, when Placido goes to move around, the head is well controlled and the hips are well controlled. If I took my wrist and hugged his elbow and wedged it in place so that he couldn't get his elbow down to the floor, now you have a really strong set of wedges around your opponent's body. This is just one potential set of wedges. When Placido goes to move around, it's difficult. Now I can add my head into the measure. I can bring my head forward towards my own hand, either my right or my left. And now as Placido goes to move around, even more difficult for him. Okay, so the primary wedges that we set around our opponent will be our head, our elbows, hands, and knees. Okay, that's the key to immobilizing your opponent. You want to consistently use wedges set around your opponent's body to inhibit the natural defensive movements of his body. The natural defensive movements of his body will always be shrimping, bridging, pushing, and movements like so. Okay, we want to be able to get close proximity to prevent pushing. We want to get weight on top of our opponent in certain positions to prevent bridging. And we want to set up wedges around the head, hips, and elbows to prevent shrimping. And if we can do those things, it's going to be very, very hard for our opponent to get out. Now, understand that the more I put my knees and elbows in as wedges around my opponent on the floor, the less weight that I can put on my opponent, because most of my weight is going down through my own elbows and knees to the floor. Sometimes you just want to put weight on people. And when we want to do that, typically we have to take our knees off the mat. Now you've sacrificed wedging because your opponent can bring his knees inside, but you've gained weight. Okay? So there's going to be times you're going to want weight more. When you want to increase the amount of weight that you put on your opponent, the general rule is we take our knees off the mat. We want to increase our wedging potential, then we bring the knees in tight to the body. So it's up to you to play between knees in tight for wedging and knees off the mat for weight. Okay? Similarly, I also want to create what we call inside position on my opponent. Whenever I go to set wedges on an opponent, his best route to escape is to get inside my wedges. Okay? So for example, if I have a crossface and my opponent puts his hand inside, when I go to exert the crossface, I don't really have as much control as I would like because he's inside the wedge. So if he starts moving around, I lose that ability to wedge his head. He's gotten inside my wedge, so to speak. Okay? Here, I'm wedging Placido's far side with my elbow. If he takes an underhook, he's gotten inside my wedge. Now when he plays between underhook and inside bicep tie, I have no ability to wedge his body successfully. If I put my knee here inside my training partner's hip and Placido intelligently brings his knee between us and pushes away, you can clearly see he's gotten inside my wedges and I no longer control his body. So there is a constant battle going on as we go to pin someone and set wedges around his body for what we call inside control. The athlete whose limbs dominate the inside position will always dominate the wedging game. So when Placido has limbs inside mine, right knee comes in, you can see he's inside all of my limbs. He's inside my left arm, he's inside my right arm, and his right knee is inside in my right hip. And as a result, I have no control over Placido. I can put as much weight on as I want. He'll effortlessly move me and put me back in his guard. Now the pin is completely lost. Okay? So I, on the other hand, want to consistently get inside his limbs. So I'm always looking to get in close a lot and bring those knees in tight to the body. So when Placido tries to come inside, it's very, very difficult. You can see what's happening here. I'm getting inside Placido's elbow. So his elbow is outside of my hip. He's always looking to get his elbow inside my hip. That's very much in his interests. We, on the other hand, are always looking to get his elbow outside the hip. With his arms around me, he has no inside position, and I can hold him here all day. But as long as he can get his elbows inside, that's when he's winning the game. So there's a real battle here for inside position. He's always looking to get his limbs inside mine, and I'm always looking to maintain my limbs inside his, and force his elbows in particular to outside position, where they're outside of my hips. Okay? If we can consistently do this, we can very easily hold people down in these positions and score. So these are the critical battles that you will have to win when it's time to mount and get to the mount and rear mount position and dominate the pinning game. We need to be able to set effective wedges around our opponent's body. The main points of the wedge are the hips, the head, and the elbows. Okay? We have to be able to maintain those and keep his limbs, his elbows in particular, in outside position, outside my hips. There will be a constant battle as he's constantly looking to get elbows inside, arms underneath, and knees inside. And we're going to have to be consistently battling against his ability to do so. When he goes to work in situations like this, when I keep my knees in good position, chin close to my own hands, back flat and straight, I see his knee coming in and I sit out to stay away from my opponent's knee, and then come back up and reclaim the position. Okay? In this way, you can see that movement is the key to controlling a good pin. If I just stay static, it's only a matter of time until my opponent generates movement that gets his limbs inside my limbs, and he wins the battle for inside control. Here's a classic example. If I stay square to my opponent and my knees are wedged in close to his body, a simple bridge over the right shoulder by Placido opens things up where he can get his right knee between us. And now he's back in guard. Okay? Contrast that with a situation where he goes to bridge, and from here I sit out. Now when Placido tries to take his right knee and put me back in guard, my hips block it because my hips are wedged to his hips. Now this comes at a price. That price is base. When I take a sit-out position, I have very strong base in the direction my legs are pointing. So if Placido tries to bridge in this direction here, I feel very heavy. But if Placido sits up and props in this direction, I have no base in that direction, and I can easily be reversed. So I have very strong base in a sit-out position in the direction my feet are pointing, but I have very poor base in the opposite direction. Okay, so when I feel Placido coming up towards me, I must be able to switch my base and return to my knees. The strongest base occurs when we're in positions square, chest to chest like so. But this also opens up inside position for Placido to bring his knee in. Okay, that's undesirable. Take the knee out. So when I feel Placido bringing the knee in, I might sit through for a short period of time. Now when I feel Placido threaten my base in a backwards direction, I return back onto my base. Placido threatens to bring the knee in, and I sit out and come back. And you can see what I'm doing here. I'm changing within side control from pin to pin based on his movements to maintain my base, maintain my wedges, and maintain my inside position. If I can do those things, I can pin someone for a long period of time. But if I just try to remain static and just hold them and try to make myself into an immovable object, you're dooming yourself to failure. There are no immovable objects in jiu-jitsu. Okay, I don't care how big and strong you are. You have a talented opponent on bottom. His bridges will be strong enough to create space and bring the legs in. He gets inside your wedges and you've lost the position. What's going to hold you in position is not making yourself immobile. It's making yourself more mobile. That's so important, I'm going to say it again. In jiu-jitsu, there are no immovable objects. Your opponent's capacity to bridge and shrimp is generally stronger than your ability to just hold someone in place. You're not going to hold someone down by making yourself immobile. You're going to hold them down by making yourself more mobile, by moving around the body from wedge to wedge, from one sit-out position back to a square position, by pommeling back to inside position as he tries to get inside position on you. Movement will preserve your pins, not immobilization. You must understand this. This is probably the single most important theme of this video, and the one, if you learn nothing else from this video, you must learn that. Okay? So once again, we've got a bunch of considerations here. First, the power of wedges. Just as a set of wedges will hold a door in place even in a hurricane, so too my elbows, knees, and head can hold even a very strong opponent down. So if we lock up in here and I bring my chin in close to my hands, my knees in close, and I dominate the inside position, I'm inside and underneath his far arm. I'm inside and underneath the near side. My shoulder is inside his jaw. From here, my knee is inside his hip. He goes to put me back in guard, and it's awfully difficult. He goes into a strong bridging motion to dislodge me. If I just stay here, inevitably he'll get his right knee inside and put me back in guard. So when I feel that danger, I sit out Now, when he tries to bring his right knee in, my hips block him. There's a strong wedge. My hips inside his hips. Now, when he tries to sit up and disturb my base, I have to come back up to my knees and return. So movement is preserving me. He goes to put me back in guard. I sit out and hold the man down. He tries to sit up on me. We come back up and lock in place. From here, he tries to put me back in guard with his leg. I wedge inside his hip with my arm. I keep his elbows off the floor. They move around his body. And as a result, we're able to move from one side to the other. He goes to put us back in guard, and we sit out. Okay? My hips blocking his hips. He goes to put us back. I come back up, reset, and look how we can move across our training partner's body from one side across to the other. Blocking and holding. Wedges set in place, good head position, locking into our opponent and forming a very strong and tight pin. So we're modifying our base of support, sometimes in a sit-up position, sometimes square on our knees, keeping our limbs inside our opponent's limbs, forming effective wedges around our opponent's body. If you can do these things, you can pin the biggest, strongest guys in front of you. Now, the major theme of this video is that your success as a pinner in the sport of jiu-jitsu is built around the idea of dynamic movement, either within a given pin or from one pin to another. But don't let this fool you from the fact that there is a place for static pinning in the sport of jiu-jitsu. I'm sure you've all had situations where you've just passed someone's guard, it was a long, hard fight, and you're physically tired and fatigued. And you're worried that having just done all that hard work of passing your opponent's guard, as you go to pin him, the guy could put you back in guard. And then you got to start all over again. There's always going to be times there's value in just sticking your opponent to the mat and don't let him move. This isn't your greatest goal in pinning. As I said earlier, the ultimate goal of this video is to push you towards a dynamic approach to pinning where you're moving around your opponent's body. Nonetheless, you should be able to just stick someone to the mat for a period of time so they just can't move, and you can get your breath back, recompose yourself, and then get back onto the business of dynamic pinning. So, whenever we just go to hold someone down in these situations, a natural question to ask is, what's the best way for me just to completely immobilize this guy so I can hold him down, get my breath back, and recompose myself? Here's one excellent method, which I greatly favor. One of the themes of this video is when we go to pin people, we want to be able to control both sides of the body. Okay, if I have both of my arms on one side of Giancarlo's body, there's nothing to stop him just rotating away from me, and then from here rolling, putting me back in guard or what have you. Okay, so holding just one side of the body isn't going to cut it. Okay. Conversely, if I just have two arms here on this side of the body, there's nothing to stop Giancarlo bringing his legs between us and just putting me back in guard. Okay, so the problem was that only one side of the body was being controlled. Now, here's something interesting. If we go across our opponent's side and we have a cross face, I can replace my right hand, which is blocking the far side of his body, with my training partner's lapel. Okay, so that his lapel does the job that my right hand would normally do in situations where we work like so. Okay, so when we get something of a bonus here when we use these lapel cross faces, you get to do with one hand what normally takes two. So here, my opponent's lapel going underneath my training partner's arm takes the place of what would normally be an underhook. This means that the far side of the body is being controlled by the material of my opponent's lapel. And this means there's nothing to stop me now putting my hand here on the floor as a wedge in front of my opponent's legs. Then I can bring my ear to my training partner's hip like so and set my body against them. When he goes to elbow escape and put me back in guard, it's almost impossible. My hand here is blocking his elbow escape. When he goes to turn away from me, my head position makes it very, very difficult. When he goes to bridge, my hip position here on the shoulder makes it very difficult. So this creates an enormously strong pin at minimal cost and minimal energy expenditure to you, where you can shut down the major forms of escape from this position, which are elbow escapes, turning escapes, the opponent gets up into you onto their knees, and bridging based escapes. So one of my first things which I recommend to my students, if you're ever in a situation where you're fatigued and need to slow the game down from a side pin and just hold someone down for a period of time, is to go through and work with the lapel crossface, where we lock in just like so, just as we did from half guard. And then from here, that shuts down my opponent's ability to move at the head and shoulders. Then from here, our second hand comes in and wedges here at the floor, and my head wedges at the far hip. When he goes to move around and put me back in guard, it's an enormously difficult thing, okay? Now, as good as that is as a static pin, we can make it even better by making further use of our opponent's lapel on the far side of the body. Very often from here, we're going to get opportunities to go through as my opponent goes to bridge and reach underneath our opponent's body and get to the far side of the lapel and lock it in here with two hands. Now when my opponent's body returns to the mat and he goes to move around, you're holding with the strength of two hands on your opponent's body. When he tries to put you back in guard, your shoulder is completely locked into his hip. When he goes to move away from you, it's almost impossible. He's locked in place. And this creates an enormously strong connection to your opponent's body through his jacket. I often make use of this method of pinning just to slow someone down right after a guard pass when you're physically tired and you just want to spend 30, 40 seconds getting your breath back. The key element is this idea that this lapel crossface enables us to do the work of an underhook with one hand. So what would normally take me two hands to hold my opponent, we go through and lock. This creates an action hand which can post here on this side of the mat, or it can go here to block any potential elbow escape. This happens to be my favorite way of holding, where my ear presses into my training partner's hip. He goes to put me back in guard, and he feels like he's completely nailed down to the floor. Okay? This is a very, very powerful way of pinning someone down. A static pin that will enable you to recompose yourself after a time of hard physical effort and you just want to get your breath back, just hold this guy down for a period of time. Another method of pinning, also based around our opponent's jacket, also very useful if you just go the other way, is this. Your opponent's belt connects through the area around your opponent's hips. If you go to control that belt, you can really stick someone to the mat with authority. This is an excellent method of pinning whenever we can't get here, the cross face, and we work over the top like so. From positions like so, we're going to go over the top of our training partner's arm in a reverse cross face, and we're going to access our training partner's belt, putting the thumb inside and four fingers around. This creates a very, very strong connection to our opponent's shoulder, which is held in place by our opponent's belt. Then we take our hand through and we put our hand down on the floor as a kind of a loose underhook. Then from this position, I bring my knee tight to our training partner's hip as a wedge here. I often put this foot here out the base. Okay, so we have an elbow off the floor and we're locked into our training partner's belt, just like so. I don't want to put this foot up. Now Giancarlo can grab my foot with his legs and break the pin. So this knee here stays down. If I want to put a foot up, it'll be this one. When Giancarlo goes to put me back in guard, it feels very, very difficult to move because my grip on the belt immobilizes the hips. When he goes to get up to his base, it's a difficult thing. He has to turn into me to get up to his knees. Also very difficult. This is another fantastically strong static pin that we can use after a guard pass just to hold someone down and bolt them down to the mat. I'm particularly fond of this method of pinning because it works well with what we'll look at later in terms of dynamic pinning. That's transitions to another pin. It also creates a very strong entry into the mounted position. So if we're here across our training partner's side, we've managed to access our training partner's belt. We have that reverse over-back grip, belt grip in place. If I see my opponent is bridging strongly in these situations, what I'll often do is just put my head down to the mat and then from here, step over our training partner's body. And now we make a transition into the mounted position here with that same belt grip. When my opponent goes to move from here, an elbow escape, the connection to the belt makes it almost impossible for the man to get away from us. You can lock in here on the arm and use your head as a base of support. He goes to elbow escape. It's enormously difficult. Or you can just keep your hand out like so and further the pin. So these represent some really simple and very practical ways to use your opponent's jacket to simply nail that man down to the mat at very minimal physical cost to you. Okay, you're not really moving at all. You just hold on to the jacket, and you can hold someone down all night in these positions. So the first one involves the use of a lapel crossface, which we lock in just like so, and then we have a hand here at the floor and our head down like so. When Giancarlo goes to put me back in guard, it's almost impossible. Okay, if for whatever reason that proves a difficult thing to get underneath our opponent's head, then alternatively we go over the top and we access our training partner's belt. Once we get to the belt, we lock everything in place. He goes to move around, and this too is an enormously strong pin. The belt just holds us in place. If I see my opponent bridging in these circumstances, this is a great time for us to step on over the top, and we just hold this incredibly punishing mounted position through the belt. When he goes to elbow escape out of here, it just feels impossible. These are enormously strong static pins, very, very simple to use, very, very energy efficient, which will nail an opponent's shoulders down to the floor, hold you in position, and cost you nothing. Now, when it's time for you to hold a pin on a tough opponent, one of the biggest things that's going to make it possible for you to do so is the simple insight, knowing what kinds of lines of resistance you can expect. What is the bottom guy going to do to me? If you know what he's trying to do to escape, it's much easier to shut down what he's doing. Let's understand that there are 4 main forms of resistance that we face whenever we're pinning someone and they're trying to get out. Whenever someone's in a bottom position, probably the most naive form of resistance is simple pushing. Okay. Now, when I say naive, we're generally discouraged from pushing from bottom position in the sport of jiu-jitsu. Okay, so if you go into a beginner's class and you see someone start in the mounted position, you'll typically see beginners try to push their way out of the mounted position, and they're always told this is a terrible mistake and doesn't work and gets you arm locked, etc., etc. You've heard it all 1,000 times. Same thing when we're across someone's side. Okay, from here, someone goes to push me from this position, we're generally cautioned from pushing. Pushing creates extended arms, and extended arms can be easily attacked and broken, etc., etc. So as a general rule, students are discouraged from pushing. But let's understand something. Pushing can be done in quite intelligent ways. If you push in the right places in the right directions at the right time, it can be a pretty useful way of initiating escapes and getting out. And secondly, not all pushes are equal. If you get pushed by a 300-pound man, technically it's not the right thing to do, but it works because he's 300 pounds, okay? So let's understand, yes, this is the most naive form of resistance, but it's still a form of resistance you have to know how to deal with, okay? So if we're in the mounted position, and I feel someone just pushing on me, what I want to avoid is pushing back into him, okay? When I push back into him, then he just turns to a given side, and that's when you fall and you lose the position, okay? As a general rule, we want to move with or around pushing forces, okay? We're told that it's naive for the person on bottom to push us, and it's true. To a degree, it is kind of naive. But we can't be naive in how we respond to it. And the naive way to respond to a push is to push back. Okay, so if he pushes hard on me and I push back into him, that's when any turn on his part off balances me, and you both end up looking naive. Okay, so when we feel someone pushing, what we want to do is rise away from the push. I never want to push back into a push. So if we start off down here and I feel someone push, I want to rise with the push. And then I want to deflect the push. If I stay square to my opponent and push back and he turns, that's when we fall, okay? You don't want to give him an ideal pushing surface. Remember, a push requires a surface to push upon. If I present a square chest to my opponent, big drums, if I present a square chest to my opponent, I'm giving him the ideal pushing platform. As he pushes, I feel it. As I push back, a simple turn on his part, and I crash and fall. So what we want in these situations is to first dissipate the strength of the push by rising with it. He pushes, we go with it. Then I want to dissipate it by turning my body. And as a result, we swim through and end up in a position where it's hard for him to resume the push. Okay? Please understand the nature of pushing in the human body. The straighter my opponent's arms, the greater the weight he can bear and push. The more bent his arms, the lower the weight that he can successfully push from here. So if I present a pushing surface here, it's easy for my opponent to push me. He does a good high push and he moves me easily. But if I'm chest to chest with my opponent and he goes to push me from here, it's considerably more difficult. I'm sure you're all familiar with that idea that when you're on a bench press and the bar is on your chest, it feels awfully heavy. But by the time you move it to the extended arm, it feels relatively light, and you can hold a heavy weight out here that you could never lift from your chest. Okay? So too when you're defending the mounted position. As he goes to push me from the chest to chest position, it requires an extraordinary amount of strength on his part. Okay? But up here, anyone can push you from a position like this. So if I feel someone is so strong that they're able to push me up from this position, we go with the push. We rise to a point where the push begins to dissipate because of distance. And then from here, we swim through one, swim through two, and we go back down chest to chest. When he goes a second time into the push, he's a little more tired now. As he pushes me up a second time, we go with it. We dissipate through distance. We swim through by turning and deflecting. And then from here, we come down a third time. And now the third, fourth, and fifth time, your opponent gets more and more tired with each successive pushing episode. And the resistance goes down until you can hold the pin. Okay? So the idea is you want to dissipate force. We want to maximize the amount of force required for our opponent by starting in chest-to-chest positions, always down here. So he has to work very, very hard now to lift us up. Here we never push back, rather we go with the push until distance means that the push starts to dissipate. If I present a square chest to my opponent, his push feels very effective. But if I deflect by bringing hips forward, the hands ride up my chest. Look how easy he pushes, the hands ride up. Okay? Then from here I turn and deflect through angle. And as a result, we come back down chest to chest. Every time he repeats this cycle, he gets progressively more and more tired until there comes a point where the pushing just peters out and the pushing becomes ineffective. Okay, so that's pushing from the mounted position. What about pushing from the side position? This too can be a real problem. Okay, I'm sure you've all had that frustrating experience where you're dealing with a big strong kid from bottom side and they start hiking underneath here and lifting your hips up off the floor and you're like, oh my God, I've lost contact with the mat, and they just take you over. Okay, whenever we see we're in situations like this, as we feel our hips getting lifted here, we always want to, as he lifts and brings me up, I always want to turn my hips. Okay, and again, we're dissipating that force away. And as a result, we come back down to the floor and go back in. As he resumes and brings the elbow back in and goes for another Herculean lift, look how we always turn the hips away. Every time he pushes hard on that hip, look how easily we can just turn and deflect and then come back up to our base. Okay? Every time I feel a hard pushing force, whether it would be an up force that takes me up like so, we just turn our hips, or a force to the back. Again, we sit through and work. Okay? Sometimes I just don't want to present a pushing surface for my opponent. Here, he has the ideal pushing surface, the pocket of my hip. Okay? So very often from here, we'll sit through in this direction. Now, when he goes to push, there's no real surface for him to push on. Okay? It's not the ideal situation. Here, the pocket of the hip forms the ideal pushing surface for my opponent. And he can either turn to his left and push me up, or turn to his right and push me down. Okay? So always, when we see our opponent turning to the left and pushing up, we rotate our hips. When we see him pushing back, we sit out. If I don't want to let him push in the first place, then we sit out towards our training partner's hips. And in this way, you can see that pushes become dissipated. Okay? When it comes time for north-south, pushes too can be a real problem there. someone gets underneath the chest and pushes strongly with a good bridge, then it creates a lot of space. I try to push back, the legs come in, and you're back in guard. Okay? The way to dissipate pushing strength here is through your training partner's belt. As we lock up, we lock into the belt, lock like so. When he goes to push, the belt connects me to him, and it completely prevents any generation of space between his chest and my chest. If we're working without the benefit of a belt in a no-gi type situation, then it's important for us always to swim through on a training partner like so. So now when he goes to push, it's only with one hand. Okay? Now as we feel our opponent pushing, we just sit out and crush our opponent's ability to push. Okay? We can also change the direction of our body relative to his. So as my opponent goes to push in a north-south position, I just walk around to a side position. Now his hands are completely out of kilter. He's going to have to change the position of his hands now to resume his pushing game. And you can see in this fashion that pushes can be taken care of quite easily just through changes in body position and this theory of dissipation, that I don't want to present a perfect pushing platform for my opponent. Rather, I want to use a combination of distance and deflection to take care of those pushing forces. Now, if pushing is typically seen as a naive form of escape, shrimping is usually regarded as the escape method of the expert. Okay, the idea behind shrimping is that it creates a certain kind of space between my opponent's hips and my hips. Okay, it can occur in many different situations. From here, as my opponent goes to shrimp away, he creates space between his hips and mine. He exploits that by bringing a knee in. Okay, the general idea is that when someone goes to shrimp, ultimately their escape will be to put you back in guard, courtesy of an elbow escape. Okay, so shrimping is one highly effective method to generate space, get our opponent onto his side, and bring his knee between us. Once one knee comes between us, it's an easy thing for him to bring the second leg in, and he's back in guard. He's effectively escaped. He's recovered his legs. There's no longer a pin. This is also true in the mounted position. From here, he has his elbows in close. Look how easily he can bring a shrimping motion to bring feet inside, bring his legs in, and now once again his legs are between me and him, and the pin has been broken as a result. Remember, there's no pin if there's legs between us. Okay, that's the death of any pin. So what should we be doing to shut down shrimping? Let's understand that shrimping has a particular kind of body movement associated with it. One is a post leg, where he posts a foot on the floor. That enables him to shoot his hip out and away. So that's the first half of shrimping. Then there's the second element of shrimping, which is extension, where the knee comes in and the head moves away. And as the head moves away, he can now plant a foot and align himself. So you see there's a bunch of highly predictable motions. The good news is they're very predictable. The bad news is they're very strong. So first is going to be a posted leg. As the leg posts, the hips move away. Then the knee moves in and the head moves away. Okay, and then finally the hips fill the space, the void, and the legs are recovered and he's escaped the pin. So those are the movements. What we need to be able to do is to shut those movements down. So when we're across someone's side, a big part of what we're looking to do is to wedge the far hip. Okay, so that when he tries to move his hips away from me, it's very, very difficult. If my opponent is so strong and pushing hard with his arms that I can't maintain that position, then it's up to me to use movement to wedge my opponent's hips. Okay, I could, for example, bring my knee right here to my training partner's tailbone. When he goes to push and take me away now, it's even harder for him to prevent that wedging around my opponent's hips like so. If my opponent successfully moves his hips away from me, then we're going to go to phase 2, where I have to shut down his ability to bring the knee inside. One of the best ways for me to do that is to go to a hip-to-hip position, here, with my hip touching my opponent's hip. When he tries to bring his knees in now and exploit the space, I can use short, choppy steps to follow his hips. If I'm on my knees, I lack mobility. And as his hips move away from me, it's hard for me to follow him on my knees. But when my knees come off the mat, now I gain mobility. As he goes to shrimp away from me, I can easily follow him with short, choppy steps and keep his hips flattened out like so. The way my opponent can stop me from working here is to bridge over this shoulder. That returns me to my knees. And as a result, he can easily start bringing knees back in. and recovering his guard. Okay, so when it comes time to shut down shrimping, it's the hips which are always the first target. The second target is always our opponent's head, because shrimping really has two big movements involved. The first is the movement of the hips away, like so, and then ultimately the head moves away. So if we're in a position like so, and I bring my elbow over the top and wedge his head in place, even when the hips move out, when he goes to finish the movement, he can't finish it. He started a shrimp, but he couldn't finish it. And as a result, I can place my hand in here and block out his hips, and now we find ourselves in a very strong pin situation once again. Okay? So ultimately, every attempt to stop someone shrimping is an attempt to immobilize the hips and the head. Okay, and stop those two critical movements that make shrimping possible. Same is true from the mounted position. When we're mounted on our training partner, I stop the initial shrimping by locking up down here with tight wedges around my training partner's hips. When he goes to move around from here, my closed feet make it very difficult for him to move successfully. In addition, I can shut down the movement of his head through the use of a good crossface and my body locked in like so. When he goes to move from here, the hips and the head, they're both constrained. Very, very hard for him to move successfully. Okay? So you can see that shrimping is one of the best methods for our opponent to escape, probably the most commonly seen method. But if we can shut down the movements of the head and the hips, we can shut down the movement of shrimping that leads into elbow escapes and broken pins. Now we're looking at the main lines of resistance whenever we're pinning someone. We've identified pushing as perhaps the most naive form of resistance, but still an important one that we need to overcome. Second one is shrimping, arguably the most commonly seen line of resistance that leads into elbow escape. Now let's look at a close second to shrimping, and one which often goes together with shrimping, that is bridging. Okay. First, let's understand what a bridge is. Our opponent's here. What our opponent ultimately is looking to do is to create space into which he can finish with an elbow escape, or to bridge me over entirely and get top position. In the cases where he goes to bridge entirely, he wants to come up on one shoulder, and then from here start with his chest facing the ceiling, and as he goes to complete the motion, he'll kick the hips through, rotate, and from this position end up chest down. So he starts chest up, finishes chest down. If he can bind his body to mine, then I will fall with him. Okay, so if I'm here across his side and he traps my arm in here and then he gives a good strong bridge over the shoulder, my body is bound to his, and as a result I end up being taken over. So too in the mounted position, from in here he binds my body to his, and as a result he takes me over and takes top position. Okay, now what's gone wrong here? One is that he's taken away my base of support by locking in on my arm. So I have no base in the direction of his bridge. Okay, that's one obvious problem here. The other is that my hips are locked to his, and as his hips change in orientation from facing the ceiling to facing the floor, mine lock with him, and I fall easily. But what if I change that? What if, as my opponent went to bridge to his left, I turned my left hip down, like so, so that my hip orientation stayed flush with the floor? What he's looking to do is change my hip orientation. It's currently flush with the floor because we're both flattened out like so. But when he goes to bridge, we change together. But as I see my opponent go to bridge and I turn like so, my hip orientation stays consistent with the floor and changes with regard to him. As he goes to bring us over, it's quite difficult for him. Okay. Another key element is that in order for him to bridge successfully, his elbow has to come in and touch the floor. That's what makes it easy for him to take me over. But if I take his elbow out wide and ensure that his elbow doesn't go to the mat, when he goes to take us over, it's quite difficult for him to complete his bridge, regardless of how I do so, here or here. Another element is I want to put a base of support in the direction of his bridge. His bridge is in this direction. If I put a hand in that direction and he goes to bridge, it's enormously difficult for him to take me over. If I don't have a hand because he's trapped it, then I can substitute a head. And when he goes to bridge, again, quite difficult. Okay. So we're always looking to subvert his bridging. Another good way for us to subvert his bridge is to reduce the contact of his hips to my hips. I can do this by climbing higher on his chest, okay? Or as he goes to bridge, I can turn my body out like so that there's no contact between his hips and my hips, okay? And as a result, he can't bind us up and take us with him. So these are some simple ways that we can reduce the severity of a strong bridge from the mounted position. From side positions, if my hips are too high and my head too low, and I let my opponent's elbow come in towards the floor, it's quite easy for him to take us over. So in these situations, I want to make sure that my head is higher than my hips. When he goes to take us over now, it's considerably more difficult. But the moment my hips come high and my head low, it's relatively easy for him to take me up and over. So let's always take care of our body posture here. When I feel I've got a strong bridger in the bottom position, I pay attention to the relationship between my head and my hips. I want a flat spine. If my spine is rounded, it's quite easy for my opponent to start taking me over in a bunch of different directions. When my spine straightens, so much more difficult. Even if I bring my head to the floor, I still want to have a relatively flat spine. When my spine rounds, that's when problems start. He turns and I fall with him quite easily. But when my spine flattens out, like so, now my head will be an effective base of support. He goes to turn, and it's quite difficult to move me. Okay? But best of all is where the head are higher than the hips, and he goes to take us over and feels it's very, very difficult. Okay? So those are some simple and practical ways to take the power of your opponent's bridging down a couple of levels and make it easier to hold those pins. Now, a fourth line of resistance that we run into almost every time we try to pin someone is them turning up to their knees. Okay, this is going to occur in a variety of different contexts. Let's look at some. From side control, my training partner gets an underhook and rapidly turns up to his knees and gets into my legs. And as a result, he's in a good position to reverse me. From north-south, from in here, my opponent goes across, punches his arm through, gets up to his knees. Once again, he's in on my legs and able to reverse me. Okay, from mounted positions. This isn't generally recommended as an escape, but if your opponent's sufficiently strong and fast, it can definitely work if you're not paying attention to what's happening, where they spin up to their knees so rapidly that your knee gets caught underneath their torso and you end up getting reversed. They didn't even bridge, they just spun rapidly. Or conversely, even if there is sufficient space for your opponent, he just spins rapidly up to his knees, comes into a turtle position and kind of shucks you over the head, and then from here you lost the pin and they're out. Okay, not the most technical way of getting out, but if your opponent's sufficiently strong and fast and agile, it can definitely work. So what should we be looking to do to shut down our opponent's ability to get up to their knees and reverse us in in this fashion? It can also occur out of knee on belly situations too, by the way, where your opponent just quickly comes up and around, comes up into the legs, and once again uses a knee escape to get away. Understand that the first shutdown on this method is always to get an underhook on the far arm and control their elbow. Okay, so if I get an underhook on my training partner and control their elbow in this position, when they try to come up towards us, it's made very, very difficult by the presence of your underhook. Okay, if they get the underhook on you, it's quite easy for them to turn. Okay, so your first line of defense to this is always to underhook your opponent's arm. That'll make it very difficult for them to turn into you in that direction. Okay, now a natural question to ask is, well, okay, that's great. What if the guy does get an underhook? If we feel our opponent gets the underhook here and starts punching through, it's going to be very difficult for you now to use force to flatten them out. So in these situations, typically what we do is we dissipate our opponent's turning force by coming into us by posting on the head and then from here spinning around our training partner's body. So as their force goes in this direction here to get up, they simply end up exposing their back. If they turn back to face us, they just go right back into the pin they were in. Okay, so as a general rule, we don't want to initially we try to stop the turning force with an underhook. If we feel we can't do that, they've achieved the underhook, rather you want to float above your opponent and spin around them rather than just try to hold on tight. As a general rule, when they get an underhook here, no amount of cross-facing will hold them down once they get an underhook. A strong, talented opponent from here will always be able to get up and go towards our back. So always our goal under these circumstances as they come up is always to post the head, put our knee over our training partner's head, and spin around their body. As they're turning to the west, we're moving around towards the east, and we end up in perfect position to exploit their movement. Okay? So these are the general kinds of movement we want to use to dissipate a knee escape. So those are the main forms of resistance that you as a developing athlete will have to deal with. Pushing, shrimping, bridging, and knee escapes. Once you understand that 90 to 95% of the resistance you get from bottom mount is going to be one variation or several variations of those four movements put together, then you know what you're fighting against. And if you know what you're fighting against, it's a lot easier to win.